Alright guys, so to close out the year, our final review, we're going to be talking about Halo Infinite. So I've decided to split this video up into really 3 parts within one video. My multiplayer thoughts, which are largely the same to my first impressions / beta video, so if you want to just go watch that instead. If you want to see multiplayer, go watch that. That'll be at the end. I want to talk everything except for story, and we'll get to the story and Halo as a franchise in the middle, in the majority of the video. So there's so much to talk about here, that's why I'm saving the campaign and all of that for later. So what I want to focus on first, really, is the graphics and the performance and the gameplay. I want to talk about all that before we get to the story. So let's go ahead and start out with graphics. And so, graphics, I was 50-50 on in this game. If you look at, for example, a cutscene, all of the cutscenes, both in-game and these more cinematic ones, look really good, right? They hold up, they work well, no problems there. Again, gameplay-wise, the interiors look really good. You have the lighting and the whole Forerunner look, with ray tracing and all of that good stuff on Series X. Looks great. Now, the open world, and trust me, we'll talk about the open world a lot in this video, this is kind of where graphically, it doesn't look bad, right? No point does this game look bad, but it doesn't look as good as the interiors and the cutscenes, right? Again, you're not gonna, be cringing or disgusted by anything, but it doesn't look as good as the rest of the game, right? Textures don't load in at certain distances, there's some decent pop in. It's just not as high quality and reflective, and the lighting isn't as good as when you're inside. Now, speaking of graphics and all of that, how does the game run? How's the frame rate? Does it crash? Any bugs? All that stuff. That's what this section's for. And let me tell you, it's going to be real short. Frame rate was perfectly consistent the whole way through, both in cutscenes and in gameplay. My only problem is that for some reason on Series X, I could not change my quality mode from quality to performance. I was stuck in quality mode. Now, it looked great. Most of the time, didn't have a problem with that, other than the lip sync, which, for a game where the main character wears a helmet, it's not that big of a problem. Really, it was just the pilot. The lip sync was off from times, and then, the weapon, I won't get into spoilers yet, her lip sync could be off time to time, and some of the brutes occasionally had bad lip sync problems. And not so much that the audio was off, it was more just the frame rate that they were moving at made it feel like it was off, where everything else was moving at a smoother frame rate. The actual lips and facial animations of the characters was significantly lower than everything else. But in-game, not in cutscene, it works well, it works fine. I wish I could have put it in performance mode, but it is what it is. As far as bugs and all that stuff, I don't think I had a single bug. There's not one that I can think of. I had one hard crash, and that's it. It ran well, played smooth. Like I said, this game did not have a lot of problems. Now, they did delay it an entire year, and I'll get to that in a second. But it ran well, like I said, no problems on the console Series X version. I can't speak for Series S or Xbox One or PC, but at least on Series X, for me, I had no problems. Now for the primary chunk of the game, the gameplay and story, right? And we'll do story second, because I feel like that section's going to get a bit long. But gameplay, right? What are you doing in this game? So it's split, I would relatively say, 50-50 between this open world stuff and your typical Halo linear level design. And so it's really not that typical Halo stuff that is the problem. For me, it's the open world. So in the open world, what you're going to be doing, it looks like a 2015 Ubisoft game, right? You have your fast travel points that you take around the map by liberating bases, and then once you've taken those fast travel points, you go and do some side activities, whether that's freeing soldiers, or taking outposts, or destroying, propaganda speakers, getting skill points. You go around the map and just do these points of interest, right? Like I said, it's a 2015 Ubisoft game. Now, that being said, it's set in the Halo universe, and I was really excited for this, or more interested in the idea of it. And so while this stuff is interesting and unique at first, like in a 2015 Ubisoft game, after you've done it once, you've done it 1,000 times, right? I mean, the fobs just get to a point where it's repetitive and boring, and saving the soldiers, all of that stuff. You get armor customization that you can find around the map, but it's for multiplayer, and I was collecting this for a very long time, waiting to have it all collected and then go check it out in multiplayer, but I found out through an external source that saved me a lot of time and disappointment that it's not really anything interesting. It's weapon charms and things like that someone like me, I'm never going to use, right? So that is what it is. The open world, like I said, isn't the greatest thing. It's very repetitive. Thankfully, it's not too big and doesn't overstay its welcome too long, but it is repetitive, and it's definitely the worst and weakest factor of the game. Not to say that everything of this open world stuff is bad. Again, in the beginning it's interesting, and once you get your fobs upgraded and you have the availability to get different vehicles, it makes it more interesting. But the large scale of things I could have done completely without it. And so, how does this compare to the interior, linear, typical Halo sections, right? And so, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? That's what they say, and that's how it is for Halo. The interior sections, the main story, your bread and butter of Halo, fantastic. All of it works great. It looks great. It's not too long. It's not too short. The pacing is right between story elements and gameplay and just action. But when you throw in, again, that open world, it ruins that pacing and all of that stuff. I mean, typically, let me give you a breakdown of the length of the game. And this is going to depend on how much open world stuff you do and the difficulty you're playing on, obviously. But essentially, they give you a 2-hour linear story classic Halo section, then probably the 4-hour open world section, followed by a 2-hour linear, 2-hour open world, and then back to 2-hour linear, right? And so it's split relatively well, but I could have just done with that all that open world stuff. So aside from the open world part of the game and your typical linear Halo interior, what's different here gameplay-wise? So really all they've changed is added a skill tree with 4 abilities, right? The grappling hook, which I'll come back to. A shield, deployable shield cover that's one way you can shoot through, they can't shoot in. A thrust ability, and the scanner you just saw here. Now, when giving players, and just in gaming in general, nothing to do with Halo specific, but when giving abilities, right, and using skill trees and all that stuff, you have to be careful, because what most games do is they wait too long to give you the really good thing. For example, the grappling hook, or the wingsuit, the rocket launcher, the jetpack, whatever it might be, right? They wait too long to give it to you, and then you don't have it for long enough to experience it. You play the majority of the game with the crappy stuff. For example, let's say you get, someone like me who likes to be a completionist, do all the side missions before you do the main missions, and you get some super cool item from being in the game. Well, they waited too long to give it to you. You've done everything. There's nothing to do. You can't use that item on anything, right? Well, here it's the exact opposite problem. They give you the grappling hook as the very first item from this skill tree that you unlock, right? And it's not like it's a choice thing. It's more just as you progress through the story, you unlock the 4 items, and the grappling hook is by far the best one, fun factor and utility wise. But I think second is the scanning beacon, which doesn't really get useful till the end of the game. And this is the main one I think they could have switched with the shield to keep the pacing up. And so, like I said, you get that grappling hook first, which I'll come back to. Then you get the beacon, which until you get these harder enemy types with that takes more shots, you really don't need. and then you get the deployable shield, which I think they should have gave you earlier, like I said, and then finally a thrust, which I only used for one boss fight and never used again. So I think that was kind of a wasted ability and a disappointment. But let's talk about the grappling hook. So when I first saw this, I was not a fan at all when they revealed this. What was it, last year in the trailer before Christmas? And I just was not, like I said, the slightest fan of it. Halo doesn't need that. That looks awful. Get it out of the game. But now that I've used it, it's probably the greatest thing they've ever added, right? It allows for really three major things, right? With the open world, and this is probably the biggest one, with the open world, it allows for mobility. It allows you to get around quicker, get to hard to reach places. You don't need a vehicle. You don't have to stumble around trying to grapple and climb up these slippery rock faces around the map. You can just grapple your way up. So that really saves a lot of time and makes that more interesting, right? Then with combat, like you see here, it does two things. Make you significantly more maneuverable for harder enemies, and let you be significantly more badass on easy enemies. Now what do I mean, right? You can grapple 360 no scope a grunt with this grappling hook from the roof. And then inversely, in boss fights, you can run away and take cover. Now, they give you the thrust ability for this, but it doesn't work as well. It has a long recharge time. And so all of this, combined with the ability, and this is the best part in my opinion, being able to grapple fusion coils, it feels great, it looks great, and it's really useful for the tougher enemies, right? It keeps them at distance, it can take out large groups of enemies, it just works really well, especially with the new types of fusion coils they added. There's their plasma and their typical, explosive one, but they have a needler one they've added, which I think is unique to this game and just has a cool effect on it. And so the grappling hook, I thought was going to be boring and over the top and too Call of Duty, it actually works really well here. I mean, it's just the best thing ever when one of the brutes throws a fusion coil at you and you catch it out of midair and throw it back at him. Or here, like grappling weapons, it looks and feels great. Alright, but aside from that, the gameplay is pretty much the same. We've talked about the changes, what's new, what's old. The only other thing I want to talk about are boss fights. So I believe, not counting the bounties in the open world, there are 4 boss fights in this game. Maybe, no, that's wrong. It's either 5 or 6, because you fight the same enemy twice. And so, for the most part, they're all good, right? So, we're going to get into spoilers here and in the next segment where we talk about the story. So, spoiler warning. You fight, I believe, 2 brute generals, which are the relatively generic fights. I don't even remember them now. Then you fight a monitor twice, which is just a typical boss fight, and none of them are really that special. They're typical boss fights, right? Take cover and take out one of its weapons, and then once its weapons are taken out and it's stunned, do damage to it, right? And so that's 2 of the boss fights. Like I said, the brute general boss fights are fine. I just showed you the one with the elite, and then there's the final boss fight, right? And a lot of these are fine, they're nothing special. It's fight waves of enemies while the boss gains health, or do something and take out his shields and then do damage, your typical boss fight shit, right? And so, the only thing I want to add to these, right, they're pretty generic for the most part, but they do, spice up the gameplay here and there, is they can be broken relatively easily. There's a boss fight, I'm pretty sure it's early on, where they throw a brute with a gravity hammer at you, and he's very quick, right? And they have a decent amount of shields. So, again, the only other thing, and this is me nitpicking, is you can break it with the grappling hook by just grappling to the ceiling and shooting them over and over and over again, just consistently grappling up. Once you have those upgrades all the way, the thing recharges pretty quickly in maybe 2 seconds, and you can just keep grappling over and over. But if you want to talk about just how to break games, I mean, we could sit here all day. So, like I said, to summarize the gameplay, everything for the most part that's new, I'm not a fan of, aside from the grappling hook. And all of the old, it works really well. And it's not because it's new, right? I want to make that very clear. There's people that if you added anything new, right, if you changed how a gun looked, changed how the assault rifle worked, they'd be pissed and they would hate it. That's not the case. It's because I play a lot of fucking open world games, and I've seen it done better, significantly better, multiple times. This is very early open world type stuff. Again, we had that big open world, insurgence of games probably 10 years ago, and this is that level, right? That you're setting the stepping stones down, you're understanding and breaking into how open world works, but you're not really going fully into it and utilizing the world building and all of that stuff. So that's the gameplay section here, right? Now, we're finally going to talk about the story, and so this is going to probably be the longest section, and this is what I play Halo for. When we get to the multiplayer, I'll tell you right out, I don't care about Halo multiplayer. I've never really liked Halo multiplayer. The gameplay, for the most part, is pretty generic. It's all about the story for me. That's all I really care about. So if you watch my first impressions video, I talked about how you pretty much have to play Halo 4 and 5 in order to understand what's going on here, and that's definitely the case. And so I realized while playing this and while giving it a day or two to sit while working on the review, that Halo kind of switches gears around in the main series Halo 4 overall ODST, and it switches from like your typical just action-driven war type plot to a more character-based story, right? Like with ODST and then with Reach, and then it brings that into the main story with Halo 4. And so we're going to go backwards and talk about Halo 4, and then 5, and then we'll get to Infinite, because it is very important that you understand both of those games and how they play into it. And I think the reviewer that you're watching has to have their opinion known on those two games in order to value anything they say about this game, right? If they hated Halo 4 and 5, they're not going to like this story because it directly ties in. Let's go back to Xbox 360 with Halo 4. And so Halo 4 is the first one that I bought, I played, and actually was old enough to understand what the hell was going on when it came out. Now, I've played Halo 2 and 3 when they came out, but I didn't understand what the hell was going on with the freaking the harbinger of truth and the prophet and the sword of Satan. I don't understand all those big words when I'm like 7. Alright? So Halo 4 is the first one that I really understood what the hell they were talking about. And even now, I'm sure I missed a whole bunch of stuff. And so Halo 4 really starts, and it's more of a setup for this arc between Master Chief and Cortana. And so you go through Halo 4, they introduce a new enemy type, which is why I like it the most. It's my favorite Halo game. And he introduces new weapons and all of this stuff, blah blah blah. You do your typical bad guy plot to kill the Forerunners and the Covenant, blah blah blah. And so it ends with introducing the idea of Cortana going rampant. I think it is introduced at the end of Halo 4, and it shows this bond between Master Chief and Cortana. You pretty much almost die at the end of it, like you do in every game ever, and that's where Halo 4 ends, right? It's just brief. You don't need to know a whole lot. The plot isn't really all that important. It's just introducing the relationship between Cortana and Master Chief. Now, obviously, Halo 1, 2, and 3 introduced that relationship as well, right? It builds on it and makes you care, but Halo 4 is really where they bring it front and center. And then we transition into Halo 5. This is the important one. And so, in Halo 5, Cortana is going rampant, like we said, and so she's doing her whole thing. She's on her mission or whatever. Master Chief is chasing her down, and Spartan Locke and Osiris team is tasked with hunting down Master Chief and Blue Team, who's hunting down Cortana. Right? A lot of people don't like these two games, right? I see a lot of hate for Halo 4 and Halo 5, but I like them a lot. I like the plot. I understand what's happening. It's a 3-game arc. We're getting there. All right. So this is really what introduces the conflict, right? Cortana wants to create kind of like this divine almost sanctuary, if that's what you want to call it, for the created, right? A new order, if you want to go all Nazi on them. And so she activates the Guardians. That's why it's called Halo 5 Guardians. These big owl-looking things at the end of the game. And it's to bring this new order where the created, which are AI and machines and all of that stuff, won't go rampant. And they can have the same quality of life as normal born people, right? And so that's her whole motivation in Halo 5, right? And John is tracking her down, trying to figure out what's wrong with her and why she's doing it, and Osiris' team and Spartan Locke are tracking them and trying to stop Master Chief, who they think is assisting Cortana. Again, this whole thing, it's about John and Cortana chasing each other, and they're intertwined, alright? That's what's important, it's what you need to get. Master Chief and Cortana, they're family, alright? In the words of Vin Diesel. And so, at the end of Halo 5, like I said, she takes the Guardians, which are the big owl-looking robot things, and takes them out, and goes and traps Master Chief and Spartan Locke and Osiris and Blue Team on this planet, and she goes to create her haven for the created, right? And that's how Halo 5 ends, on a big-ass cliffhanger. And so, now that you understand, Halo 4 and Halo 5 were like parts 1 and 2. And Infinite is part 3, setting up the final act and giving you closure to the John and Cortana arc. So Halo Infinite heavily focuses on the closing and final chapter of this arc between Master Chief and Cortana, right? It introduces it and plays it out through the weapon, which is a new AI, and we'll get more into that later. But they do something interesting, and instead of making a direct sequel and just picking up from where 5 left off, there is a time gap, and they kind of jump into the future, and the story of what happened between this time gap is kind of filled in through audio logs and the main story as you progress towards the end. So this story is pretty much split into 2 parts, and so there's the Master Chief and Cortana side of it, and then the part with the Banished and the Brutes and all of that. And so we'll do the Banished arc because, well, that's the primary plot of the game. It's insanely simplistic and isn't really the focus in what I like from the story, right? That's fine. It does its thing. It serves its purpose. It gives people to shoot at. But ultimately, that's not why I like this story at all. So it starts out with Master Chief getting his ass kicked, which I wish they would have gone into more, and this is kind of my only problem with the time skip here. That's a big deal. It's the first big loss for Master Chief, and they kind of just glance over it and use it as an opening cutscene for the game. But it is what it is. From there, you get woken up by this pilot in space, and then you end up on a ring. Bad guys have control of the ring. You've lost the war, and you have to go ahead and take back the ring. That's essentially a very generalized, non-spoiler plot of the game. So from there, we are now going to get into heavy spoiler territory. Alright, so you really go through, when you're doing pretty much, for the most part, like I said earlier in the gameplay section, open world activities, right? That's a good middle section of the game. It throws you in with, like I said, some linear, typical classic Halo story sections when you're inside Forerunner buildings, fighting Covenant and Brutes and all that stuff. Then it throws you outside, back inside, outside, back inside. That's kind of how the story progresses, right? And at each classic Halo linear part of the game, you're progressing the story, right? So essentially there's 4 main chunks of story along with the audio logs. And so while you're trying to fight the Banished and stop them from taking over the ring and the Harbinger of Truth and all that stuff, right, there's a secondary story, and for me, the more interesting story is between Master Chief and Cortana, figuring out what happened there, because Master Chief was supposed to kill her because she went rampant and was destroying everything with these Guardians, people who didn't submit to her. And so they created a, spoiler, Cortana 2 essentially in the weapon, and made her to take down Cortana. She was supposed to be deleted, and this is kind of where the mystery starts in the beginning of the game. You're trying to figure out why she wasn't deleted, what happened to Cortana, all that stuff. And Master Chief's this typical silent type, so he really doesn't give you much. You're more living through the eyes of the weapon, and she's asking all the questions you want to know. What happened? Why didn't she get deleted? How did Master Chief kill her? All that good stuff, right? What did she do? And filling in just context for those people who might not have played Halo 4 and 5. And so you find out through backstory and Master Chief explaining when he does talk that Cortana between 5 and Infinite went around and was just killing everyone who would not submit to her new plan for the created, right? She destroyed UNSC outposts, the home world of the Banished. I mean, just blowing everything up with those big ass guardians, right? And so from there you kind of understand that she had to be deleted and destroyed. But before all of that happens, she tries to reach out to John, right? But the bad guy, Big Monkey Man, I'm not gonna try to pronounce his name, it starts with an E, drawing a blank right now. This is why that story is significantly less interesting. But he shows up instead of the Master Chief and confronts Cortana and wants to use the power of the ring to kind of take over, typical bad guy stuff, the universe, and have control. So what's so special about this ring? Why does the Harbinger of Truth come into play? And so basically there's 3 sides here, right? There's Master Chief and the defeated UNSC. They just want to stop the Banished and, in case of Master Chief, get Cortana back, right? Or at least find out what happened. Okay, there is Banished, right? And they want control, like I just said, and they want to kill everybody and be controllers of the universe, like I said, typical bad guy stuff. Then there's the Harbinger of Truth, which is the big floaty space alien lady you've probably seen in some thumbnails, right? And she basically wants revenge, right? The Forerunners and the humans created, and as a byproduct ended up with the Flood. Now, if you don't know what the Flood is, you're too young. That's like pre-Halo 4, Halo 3, Halo 2, Halo 1 type stuff, right? And so, like I said, they're really tying it all in. And now that I'm making this review, I've realized that there's a lot of big boy words in Halo. Like, you got, like I said, the Created, Forerunners, Banished, the Flood, the Harbinger of Truth. Like there's all these big space words, right? Make it sound cool. But, so that's basically your 3 sides, right? And so the Harbinger of Truth is using the Banished to access this ring and drill down into it to release the Flood. Okay, so that's their whole plan. That's the big grand scheme of things. Obviously, you stop them, you take back the ring, and that's pretty much how the game ends. Now, a lot of people were upset with how Halo 5 ended and just the idea of turning Cortana bad. And so what they decided to do was kind of give her a redemption, and that she was waiting for John to stop the Banished and the Harbinger of Truth from taking over the ring and releasing the Flood. She kind of regrets what she did at the end, and kind of like a whole Death Star Rogue One thing, makes a weakness or just a signal for John to take him down, right? So that's how it ends. And this, instead of being a closing, the final act in the trilogy of Halo 4, 5, and Infinite, it's more the beginning. It's almost like there was a game missing between 5 and Infinite, where that ends with Atrocitus beating Master Chief as the 3rd act, right, as the 3rd game in the trilogy, and this is kind of the start of a new one. But they kind of combined it, just because it's been so long, into one game. So we talked about the main story, the Banished, the Harbinger of Truth, all of that stuff. Plot A is what I'm going to call it. Cortana and all that stuff, how she relates to them, right? Plot B, and like I've been saying, the more interesting one, is the relationship between the weapon Cortana and John. Right, so Cortana does her thing. She's not in the game that much. She has whispers here and there, and then the grand plot reveal at the end, but that's pretty much it, right? It's really between Master Chief and the weapon, and occasionally this new pilot character that they showed off all the way back in the beginning, over a year ago. Now, with Halo and Master Chief, right, there's not a lot of emotion there, right? And there is at times, right? But it's more man in green armor shoots aliens, shoots monkeys, right? That's what Halo is, right? But here they actually give Master Chief some lines, right? They let him talk some more, give him some emotion, and I'm a big fan. All right, there's some really good scenes. There's a whole sub arc about Master Chief not trusting the weapon because she's, like, spoilers, a copy of Cortana, and he trusted Cortana, and you see how she ended up turning on him. This is before he knew that she would end up turning back and regretting everything she did. But there's a whole sub arc for multiple hours of the game where she just wants you to trust her, and John just isn't having it, right? Giving her limited information, and just they fight back and forth, and it's great, like 10 out of 10. So for me, it's that more character-driven stuff that's interesting. I can play Green Man in armor, shoot bad guys all day, right? In fact, we've played it, Halo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Infinite, ODST, we've played it at least 8 times now, right? I mean, it gets old, but they introduce new and interesting things and ideas and give characters more depth, and it just makes it great. So, what do I think of the story overall, right? Well, what am I going to score it? I'm separating the score between the story, the multiplayer, because they're 2 separate things. They cost 2 separate price points, and really one just released significantly before the other, and so it's easier to separate them, give it separate scores, and do it that way. And so for the campaign, the only weaknesses, just summing up everything I've said, it's really just the open world stuff. Everything that's new doesn't work great. It needed more time. But everything that's old, the story, the characters, the interior level design, the combat, all of that is fantastic, right? I mean, this is great. I did not have high expectations for this. I did not expect this to be good, and I was excited for the open world part of it, and that was, again, the part I was least interested in and the weakest parts of the game at the end of the day. And so, why do I like this game so much? Why do I like the story so much? I think it balances the action and the emotion very well. Halo, like I said, has never done this before with the character moments and all of that stuff. You have your action scenes like this one. Right, and I'm not downplaying it, right? This is fantastic. It looks great. It's well shot. It's designed well. The environment looks cool. The transition from interior to exterior, introducing the new villain, right? All of that looks great, right? But the problem there is that you've done this before. Like I just said, you've done this 8 times, right? So that's more expected, right? That's what I expect from Halo. But the moments that made me absolutely love this game are the moments that you don't expect.
Broken, beaten, useless.
Enough.
When? When is it enough, Chief? When we're in there? Because that's where I belong. In there, with them. Worthless junk. Not this. I'm not you! I'm not a pilot! I'm not even a soldier, a Marine! I'm a fraud. I stole that pelican. I stole it! You know why? Of course you don't. Have you ever been scared? So scared that you... I'm worthless. You should leave me here with the rest of the garbage.
We all fail. We all make mistakes. It's what makes us human.
I'm sorry, Chief, but how have you ever failed?
I should have protected Cortana. Stopped everything from going wrong. I failed her. I will not fail you.
Chief. Wait. We're going to make it. We have to.
This is all I've got.
It's all we need. Our only way home is straight through the heart of the Banished.
We need you.
We can fix this.
Together.
Of course we can. Together.
Ah, damn, that clip is just as good as I remember. And so, it's moments like that, and there's a handful of them. There's probably 4 or 5 of them between you and the pilot, and you and the weapon. Specifically you and the weapon, and then Cortana at the end of the game, where it's just not expected from Halo. That's not what I expect. I expect Green Man shoot aliens, and it just surprised me how emotional this game was. And so, before I get to the scoring, and I know we've been talking a while, and I still have to talk about multiplayer, there's one final thing that I want to talk about that I think is done incredibly well. So, you have to set up in this game, because, like I said, there's almost a missing game between 5 and this, because this sets up a new trilogy. You have to set up the weapon, right? At the end of the game, spoilers, they allude to the fact that she's going to be called Cortana from now on, because she's the same model of AI. It's essentially a copy of Cortana, and so they have the impossible task of taking a character. This is like replacing Master Chief, right? They're taking a character, almost the main character, and replacing them with something new. And this could have gone so bad, so easily. People could have absolutely hated the weapon. But I think she works really well, right? She's a copy of Cortana, but not exactly, right? All of the AI buddy type assistant features are still there, right? It still very much seems like Cortana or an AI assistant, but it's much more human and emotional and just witty and more fun than Cortana, right? Again, it takes the place of Cortana, and it's almost like they use the entire game to kind of ease the player into the replacement. They use the entire game to compare the two and contrast the two, and at a certain point when she learns that she is a Cortana replica, basically a clone, she fears that she's going to become Cortana, and it's this whole thing about destiny and all that stuff. It's great. Like, this game, this is fantastic, right? The Banished stuff and you know, just the shooty stuff, it's fine. But the story is fantastic, right? And I've been delaying this review for a couple days now because I just did not know what score to give this, and I've been going up and down. The first half of the video, I was lowering it. The second half of the video, I'm now raising it, and I still don't know where to put this. I've been working on my best and worst games of the year video because it is about that time, and so I've been seeing and reviewing and going over a lot of really bad games and a lot of really good games, right? And just, this is up there. This is really good. Even the worst parts, which is the open world sections, are just, they're still good, right? The gameplay, if you haven't played Halo before, is gonna feel fantastic, right? It's solid, it works really well. I mean, it's been solid for 2 decades now, right? And so, that all ties in. The story, like I've been saying this whole time, the new level of emotion that isn't previously there in any Halo game, at least that I've felt. It's great. This game's a 9 out of 10. I was going back and forth between an 8 and a 9, and the story sections, just everything that is classical Halo works well. That is 10 out of 10. It's perfect. Right, but the open world just brings it down a point. It's not good. It's repetitive. The game's about 10 hours long, and it's decently split, probably a good 5.5 to 6 in the open world. So It's not too long, it's not super obnoxious like something like Far Cry is, but it's still repetitive and very boring. I got bored of the open world sections very quickly, so that's what brings it down that point. But everything else is absolutely perfect. So if you haven't watched my, I believe it's titled a First Impressions video of the Halo Infinite multiplayer, just go watch that if you're still here at this point and want to hear me talk about multiplayer. I feel exactly the same. I only really enjoyed Halo Reach's multiplayer because of the customization, and Halo 5's multiplayer because of the whole deck card system and made it at least unique and interesting. I find that Halo's multiplayer is insanely simplistic, like Call of Duty, just with a higher time to kill. It bores me a lot. I don't think it's that interesting, and with the lack of progression here, or at least it all being tied behind a paywall to the battle pass, it just doesn't really interest me. That, along with the ridiculous shop that I won't even get into, is just I'm not a fan of this multiplayer. It's solid, the gameplay works, but it's just insanely generic and lacks progression. And if you know me, if you've seen any of my videos, progression is my big thing. You can't keep me playing on fun. I need a reason to be playing, right? Give me something to unlock. And this doesn't have that. It has very limited modes. As far as the last time I played, there's no swap mode, which is really the only mode I'm interested in with Halo. And so multiplayer is a bit of a letdown, but again, it is free, so that factors in. And I didn't even talk about the fact that this is on Game Pass, so that just raises the score up for the campaign even to a higher 9, just because, again, it's fucking $5. So this multiplayer, like I said, I didn't have high expectations. It's exactly what I expected. It's like a 5 out of 10. Right? Gameplay wise, I'd put it at a 6. It's above average. It's more fun than something like Call of Duty multiplayer that's just the same thing. But the lack of progression, it all being tied behind a battle pass, the store being absolutely ridiculous, brings it down that extra point to just average, right? I played this for 3 days, I think, and then I don't think I touched it again. It's fine. It is what it is. If you like it, you like it. You know, more power to you, but just not a fan of the multiplayer. But that'll do it for today. This will be, I believe, the last review of the year. We've got to do best and worst games, and I think we'll have one more video maybe, and that'll close out the year. But I hope you guys enjoyed this review. It's a long one, like a lot of reviews tend to be, and let me know what you think of Halo Infinite, the campaign, down in the comments below. Loved it, hate it, what your favorite part was, and make sure you guys, if you're still here at the 45-minute mark, subscribe, comment, like, all that good stuff. Helps out the channel. It's the end of the year. It's free to do, and you'll just see my best and worst games of the year videos when those drop in the next couple weeks. But hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you on the next one.